We were looking at seekers and first followers, because basically when we talk about social justice, I think the thing that we talk about most often is the kind of cycle of action and reflection. And that kind of leads to the thought of like all of a sudden you just pick up one day and start doing something, and then you take time afterwards to reflect on it. But actually it's not just that you get involved in something one day. There's a whole process of like coming to a place where you're actually kind of like aware, informed, and ready enough to be able to take action on something. Because taking action isn't always easy. So what we wanted to look at in terms of seekers and first followers is what kind of preparation happens ahead of time in order to be able to bring you to the place of action. Then you can act, and then you can reflect on how all of that went. So that's kind of the idea between seekers and first followers. And something that's really important about seeking is it's not just kind of like haphazardly like looking around for something that speaks to you. It's a process of cultivating yourself and making yourself a fertile ground. It's the idea of, you're not necessarily jumping at the bit to do something right now, but there's a very active passivity that's involved in it. You are kind of actively cultivating yourself to be open and to be receptive. And there's a lot of work that goes into that, and it's not necessarily easy. And then somewhere in there, something clicks, and it's the conversion from that kind of preparation into action. And that's kind of where you see the first follower is something has clicked inside them that takes you through the moment of like being ready to do something to actually doing something. So that's kind of what we wanted to look at with this segment, and today with the Arab Spring. There was something in this movement where there was like a sentiment kind of like growing, and then there was a turning point somewhere where it clicked into action. And so we're really lucky to have more to go for that.
Is this for the video, or is this just so people can hear?
What's that? That's for
For the video? Okay, all right, welcome. It's great to be here. I had no idea that this stuff went on until Will approached me to fill in for someone who canceled. So I'm going to play that second fiddle like I played second trombone with all my heart. So never made it to first trombone. So then I switched to tuba because there's only one tuba in the band, and it was me. I was first chair tuba. So this, what I want to do today is I want us to sort of frame, I'm going to ask us to, we're going to move far away. We're going to look at the Arab Spring and use this as a kind of a paradigm to explore with this understanding of following versus seeking. I have really designed this talk on the idea of the first follower. And I think when you workshop this out, you can bring in the paradigm of what that means with seeker. But I really like that idea of the first follower, and that really helped me to really reshape the way I thought about the Arab Spring and to kind of look for those traits that are something quite different actually than seeking. And so that I kind of came down on that side. It's a new idea for me, this first follower. And so I kind of was working that idea. So we're gonna look at the Arab Spring. We're gonna look at not too much detail, but as a phenomenon of human nature, as a phenomenon that has come into our presence through really no work of our own, but has happened and has influenced what has happened in this country, and might actually have an effect on the way we see ourselves as Americans in the world, but also an effect on when we look to other peoples. This is one of those rare occasions where Americans are, at least Americans that look around, are really in awe of what is happening, and that the human spirit of what is going on in places that has gone on in places like Egypt and now in Syria and Tunisia and Bahrain and all of these places have just really stunned Americans, because Americans have always thought we're the lovers of freedom, we're the ones who really define what it means to be free, and then we look at the Arab Spring and a lot of us are wondering, wow, these people understand something that we don't, right? And so to look at the circumstances of that, I've done it in the idea of following the spring. Let me see. I hope this works when I hold it. I don't know. Is that like a spinning? Oh, see, this is just perfect. I was having trouble getting internet in here. This is my Prezi, which is, anybody know this? For goodness sake. This should be moving, right? This should be going to the next slide. This is classic. It was even working before this. You saw me playing around with it.
It's on the internet, correct? So.
I did connect. Let's see. Yeah, I'm connected. Okay, I'm just gonna refresh. All right. Let's go full screen. There we go. Okay. Everything you may have remembered that all of this started actually in Tunisia with a fire starter. And there's a figurative sense in which this fire was started, and then there's a literal sense in which this fire was started, that this was actually started by a person who started a fire and literally started himself on fire. This was the street vendor in Tunisia that came out of, do I have to hit that every time? I guess I do. This is a
field
clip.
just outside Sidi Bouzid lies the body of 26-year-old Mohamed Bouazizi in the peace and dignity that eluded him in life. His fresh grave marked only by the Tunisian flag that drapes over it. On December 17th, Mohamed Bouazizi, a single man who had supported his widowed mother and siblings since the age of 10, took to the streets with his fresh produce cart to earn a day's wage.
At around 10 a.m., as he was making his way through the streets, the policewoman began to harass my son, so he called his uncle to help him. She left him alone only to return later to confiscate his cart. Mohammed said no. The policewoman took the fruit, but when she tried to take his scales, Mohammed refused. She slapped him and began to insult and curse his father.
Mohammed, frustrated and ashamed by the public humiliation he endured at the hands of police, set himself on fire outside the local municipality building. His closest friends, anguished by Mohammed's actions, took to the streets and began a popular uprising that lasted for weeks before it toppled the 23-year-old rule of President Zain al-Abidine Ben Ali. In one of the most foretelling moments at the peak of the Tunisian uprising, the soon-to-be ousted president visited a badly burned Bouazizi in his hospital bed just before he died. Police delivered the body to the family for burial under tight security, afraid news of his death would only fuel the uprising even more.
When we wanted to bury him, we wanted to carry his body in front of the municipal building where he burnt himself. The police wouldn't let us. They told us to take his body through a place nobody would see us.
But cell phone video given to Al Jazeera by his family shows hundreds of mourners risking the police crackdown to escort the body for burial. Away from the popular uprising his self-immolation triggered, Bouazizi was a simple and modest man.
Not a single person hated him. He did not have a single fault or bad behavior. He had ambitions that he never achieved. He wanted to get married and have some money to take care of his mother and family.
Outside his family home stands the produce cart from which Mohammed tried to earn a dignified living. And kilometers away, his family, friends, and strangers now come to visit the man whose death, they pray, has given birth to a nation's freedom. Ayman Muhyiddin, Al Jazeera, Sidi Bouzid.
So this is before Egypt. This is before anything. Was this one thing? There are a few dynamics to kind of pick up in here. The first thing is to notice why he did this in the first place, and that there was a sense of frustration. There was a sense of frustration of one person for very different reasons. He was not opposed to the government. He was not opposed. He was not after something. He just was frustrated with the way that the government was handling his license. There's talk that there was a gender issue going on, that he was humiliated and shamed because this was a female police officer, and this was a public place, and she used words that he interpreted as shaming him. He felt frustrated at the end of his rope. Right? He had nothing else in his mind, nothing else to live for. Because when you think of setting yourself on fire, you must know that is the single most painful thing to do to your body. There is nothing more painful than burning. And that's the reason why people would burn other people, because they know it's the way that you cause the most pain. Right? So to be in that state of mind is to think about what it would take for you to set yourself on fire. Is a real stretch for a lot of us, because none of us would what does it take to get to that place of frustration? That is then triggered by this reaction of the police which is the interpretation of others around him about when he dies. You notice that the police didn't want this to get out, and that there was an attempt to suppress the movement of having a public burial. And that reaction against that suppression is really, really important to remember, because that is one of the themes of the Arab Spring. And we'll look at this a little bit, but that idea of suppressing the desire of people to have dignity, or whether it be in a burial or whether it be selling in a streetcar. And this is then the fire has spread from this point, and this is the point at which the Arab Spring really generates from this one moment. This is a timeline which you can look at, which talks about the revolutions, how they come out. And I want you to notice there in one particular part. I'm not going to play the whole thing, but this is in real time. You see the time scale up there. This is Tunisia, and there's the timeline going across there. See 24 days. And then watch, the Tunisian army throws its weight behind the uprising, and January 14th, he steps down. And right at that moment, look what happens. 1, 2, 3, Yemen, Jordan, Egypt, there's a vehicle, Bahrain will come up as well. This is what starts this effect of all of these countries. Here comes Algeria, Bahrain, Libya, Morocco. These are all going to come online now. Boom, boom, boom. Like dominoes. But actually not like dominoes. More like someone pulling a trapdoor in real time. This happened in a matter of days and weeks after this happened. Oman, Saudi Arabia, these are all protests that came up in the wake of that. This is, 20, 60, 80 days, a couple of months. Right? And those are really the players that we have now in the Arab Spring. These are. But it's interesting to note, I want that this point here, which is where the Tunisian one ended, where he stepped down, where the president stepped down, and that is the point at which you get this cascade of countries who are standing up against their governments and voicing their dissent. That in many ways what happened, it looked very easy at first. It looked very hopeful that Tunisia rose up and its government against the president, and the president stepped down. There was very little police violence. The army quickly was sided on the people, and that he stepped down very quickly. And that, in some respects, sent a message to other Arab countries that this was something you could do if you rose up against your leader, that all you needed to do was show them that you wanted reform, and that they would then honor that request. That created a climate of false hope that this was going to actually happen. Because when we know that what happened after that is something very different. So these countries started, the people of these countries were watching what was happening in Tunisia and thought, wow, we can do this here too. In some cases, yes, and in some cases, no. And that's what I want to kind of look at here. That what happened in many countries is you did not have the police, you did not have the military fall in line with the people. And that not all these rulers were so interested in reform or stepping down, and that there was a violent crackdown in many countries. And so you have police violence in the streets, you have thousands of people now dead, killed by forces that were paid and employed by the government and by groups in Libya, mercenary groups under Gaddafi, which came in and doing this. Again, and there are countless deaths, and that the response of it, and this is what always keep in mind, the response of the government to these deaths, to the protests, actually probably had a more solidifying effect on the protests than the original idea itself, which was to rise up in this great hope that you could reform your country, and you could have a democracy, that you could have a voice in these countries. And that the crackdown against these protesters has actually given more fuel to the fire and has solidified the Arab Spring more than any other single factor. Which some leaders learned this very quickly and saw this, and other leaders did not. And what you have is you have this is Syrian. These are Syrian protesters. But again, this idea that this was something from the people, and that he's giving the peace sign, which is kind of an international sign of peace, is this idea that there's something sparked the imagination of these people, and that once they saw that they were going to be denied this in many countries, that spark turned into a fire, that this became a cause for many people worth dying for. And we'll come back to this later when we talk about this. I mean, what is worth dying for? What do you need to get it to that position? Do you ever want to be in that position? And yet, this is the sort of thing that was happening all over the Arab Spring. I see in this there have been three different outcomes for these countries that have participated in the Arab Spring. The first outcome is overthrow. And in countries like Tunisia, we saw that's one in the clip. Ben Ali, who was the president there, the ruler there, he left. In Egypt, we watched that one last year unfolding, where you have Hosni Mubarak, who eventually left. It was not an easy one, but it was more of a stalemate. There wasn't as much violence against people. The army was on the side of the people. The police kind of held it at bay. There were a few times where Mubarak had, I don't know if you saw this, riders coming in on horses, and there were small instances of violence. But for the most part, it was a stalemate. And people in Tahrir Square really held out for months and months and months, and called for that one thing. The one cause they wanted was for Mubarak to step down. That's all they wanted. There was never anything other than that. The idea that again, the idea of leaderless ideas comes into here. There's no one person that you can look to in any of these who could say that they are the leader of the uprisings. Or there are people who we want to be the leaders, who we go to and say, you were at the forefront. You ran the Facebook page for Egypt. You're the leader. Do you think you're the leader? And they always say, I'm not the leader. I ran the Facebook page. I didn't call the shots. I mean, this was something organic that grew up, this idea of a leaderless movement. It's not that they didn't know what they were following. They did. Everyone knew what they were following, but they weren't following a person. They were following an idea. And that's something crucial to remember, is this wasn't about personality. This wasn't about, we want this person to lead us, not this person. It was that we want this idea to lead us. If the person who is the leader wants to go along with that idea, then we will listen to them. If they don't, then we want them to step down. And so this is one of the options, is that overthrow. This happened in Yemen. Saleh actually had to leave the country for for medical reasons, and he has now just recently negotiated a step down where he is going to resign. This only happened last week. This was many months in happening. And of course, Gaddafi was overthrown by a combination of rebel forces with NATO support, air support, which cleared the way for the rebels to kind of isolate Gaddafi to the point where he is dead. I think isn't he the only one that's dead? Yes, he's the only leader that has died in this is Gaddafi. The other three stepped down. So that has been one of the options. Right? The other option is there are several leaders in the Arab world who have taken on reform. King Jordan, early on, King Abdullah, right when the people revolted and rose up and went into the streets, he immediately clicked into reform mode. There's new elected officials, a whole elected process, which has an inclusive cabinet. He granted the people freedom of expression and gathering. He instituted electoral reform, and also a call for national unity, for all Jordanians to come together. And that was it. There was very little violence. The police did not crack down on it. King Abdullah opened the gates to reform, and Jordan is not in a state of civil strife right now. They are in a process of implicating these things, and that's not always easy, nor is it instant. But clearly, this was one of the leaders who took a very different approach to that same impulse. And Jordan is a fairly safe place. Same thing with Morocco. I can't remember that guy's name. But again, the leader in Morocco, the king, it doesn't matter to him, but he instituted constitutional reform. Prisoners, he released political prisoners out, and this was a way for people to be shown that they had a voice, that this was genuine. Now, there's some of them, like in Oman, where you kind of wonder what's behind that, because in Oman you had the president who just said that he's going to decrease corruption and then increased like everybody's salary, because Oman's got tons of oil, right? So in that one, it's like they're quiet, but why are they quiet? They're quiet because they get true reform, or they get quiet because they got a bigger paycheck? Are they being sedated, or are they being satisfied? That actually is going to come up later on when we talk about this, the difference between being satisfied and sedated. And really but it was very effective. It's very effective. That Oman is now taken as sort of, there's nothing to rebel against because everybody has more money, right? I don't know whether they're going to actually institute those things, whether there is going to be a decrease in corruption, that is yet. All of these stories are untold, right? But I'm trying to categorize them so we get a feel for the different ways. They didn't all end the same way. And the third way, which is the one which is really the institution of what I call the brutal silence. And this has really happened in 3 countries in particular. Saudi Arabia is the untold story. We don't know what's happening. The relationship that our government has with the House of Saud is unholy at best. And we are in with them so solid because of our relationship with our foreign policy and oil, because of their Sunni background, that they are enemies of Iran. We are enemies of Iran, so we are friends. They house our military, they give us oil, they give us political clout in the region. There's all sorts of reasons why we don't want to do anything to oppose Saudi Arabia. Which is why Saudi Arabia has taken the choice of silencing their people through a kind of a brutal institution of silence, of not allowing protests to happen. I don't know what kind of brutality has happened. There's very little that comes out of Saudi Arabia. We know that there are people in Saudi Arabia who want social reform. That the women's movement actually in Saudi Arabia is very strong. Women are very highly educated in Saudi Arabia, but they don't really have anything to do with their education once they get educated. So there was this thing, I don't know whether you saw this whole movement about women driving. It's illegal for women to drive. That was in Saudi Arabia. And so there were a few, like a handful, like 6 or 7, I think, who actually took to the wheel on one day and drove around Saudi Arabia, and they were just immediately arrested, and their cars were taken away. And I haven't heard anything from them since. I don't hear, the silence in Saudi Arabia is just blaring. It's so loud, but nobody knows what's going on there. But clearly, that ruling, the monarchy in Saudi Arabia has confidence that they can suppress any sort of uprising. Also, they also paid off their people too. Lots of money went into the government, went into increasing salaries, to doing it, and they've got so much money that they can actually do this. But no promise of reform, no promise of instituting other than anything less than a monarchy in Saudi Arabia. Bahrain is a story which is incredibly violent. If you take a minute, there actually is a documentary that was made by Al Jazeera called, oh my goodness, I just watched it 2 weeks ago. It's winning all sorts of awards out there, and it is the story of a Bahrainian revolt. And there's no more brutal crackdown that I've seen in Bahrain. And that includes Syria, although Syria is, I think, probably going to beat them. What's different about Bahrain is the audacity to which the government cracked down on protesters. And they had, I don't know if I have this on my door now, Pearl Roundabout. It's this beautiful, graceful thing. It's a central roundabout, a huge roundabout in the middle of the capital of in Bahrain. And all these people came out after Tunisia, and just this sort of joyous, almost childlike hope that they could have democracy. And they saw what was happening, and all these people came out, and it was this sort of festival type. If you see footage from it, people are happy, they're celebrating, we want democracy, this is great. Again, and the police and the government, which is mainly Sunni. This is one of those countries where you have a small Sunni ruling class. The monarchy is Sunni, and most of the population are Shiite. And Shiite are like Iranians. Shiite are the minority in the world. Sunni, and I always think of Sunni with the sun, like the sun always shines on the Sunni. Right? There are lots of Sunni all over. That's the major one. The Shiite are a much smaller sect of Islam that are mainly confined to Iran, parts of Iraq, and the population of Bahrain, which is right over the straits, right over the Gulf there. The Sunni monarchy absolutely clamped down, just killed people without regard for anyone. And actually, the one thing that tipped the balance, where I just couldn't believe it, is they invaded the hospital, the big hospital in the capital, where they were taking in all these people and trying to get them to live, and they were just coming in, just dying, the military, by the order of the king, invaded the hospital, went into the hospital, arrested all the doctors and nurses, and then used the floors that all of the protesters were there, and used them as interrogation rooms and torture. Used them to torture the people that had already been shot and brutalized by the police, and used the hospital of that, and accused all of the medical staff of being traitors. If you helped anybody who was injured in there, you were a traitor. And Bahrainian TV, the clips of the way that they painted this, and the way that they have totally brutalized and gone after and done nighttime searches and just cleaned out neighborhoods and imprisoned people and killed thousands of people in Bahrain. But what have you heard about Bahrain? Almost nothing. Why? Saudi Arabia, right? So they're right next to, they're like a little island in the middle of Saudi Arabia. It's a very interesting place. And there's a huge military base, Navy base right there that we have. I won't go into it's how uncomfortable I am as an American and the American government is doing nothing. We will do nothing to topple this government, because our one base that protects us, the strait that all of our aircraft carriers come out of Bahrain, and all of our missiles are pointed at Iran from there. And it's only like 30 miles across, right? The whole Straits of Hormuz, this one that the Iranians say they're going to close off, that's very near Bahrain. So there is a lot of politics involved in Bahrain, but much of the same ones that are in Saudi Arabia. But the Bahrainian monarchy has been much more brutal, as far as I can see, at that. And again, they did it because they could. They knew that the international community would do nothing, because America would do nothing. Because we are the superpower. If we don't do anything, no one will. Because we spend 48% of all money spent in the world on military. All the money spent in the world on military, America spends 48% of that. Every other country combined is 52%, and we're 48. We got to get over 50, right? That sort of relationship is what kind of governs these ideas. And then, of course, the one that we're so painfully aware of on a day-to-day basis is Syria, where you have a ruler who has gone off and completely declared war on his own citizens. That there is no sense in which there's any sort of distinction made about who is a rebel force and who isn't. He doesn't even try to make it up. He's just bombing neighborhoods and homes as we speak, although it's nighttime now. I don't know if they take a break at night or whether they continue. I'm not sure how that works. But so Syria is one of those ways where we have chosen to absolutely try and crack down. But the Syrians are doing different stuff. I don't know what makes these people tick. These are for me like the model of tenacity, of nonviolence to the very, very end. Although that's shifting now because the country's in civil war. But for months and months and months, the Syrians said, "We will not engage. We will be peaceful. We will not fight back." Do not, told the Syrian army, "Do not fire back. We are about peaceful demonstration. We will just keep marching." And now it's impossible. And so things are crumbling in a way that we're just making it up as we go, and we're trying to get these things. But he's not listening to anyone. This is going to get worse before it gets better. And honestly, I don't have the answer to that. I don't know. I have no idea what America should do. I know we should not go in there with tanks. And I know we shouldn't bomb anything, because that's never a good idea. We learned that in Iraq. Yeah, I didn't put Iraq up here. They haven't been able to have an Arab Spring. Oh my gosh, or Afghanistan for that matter. But this idea that there is a kind of a pattern here, there's a kind of a pattern, and I want to kind of look at this, that there's this idea that there starts with a spark, that something happens to start this off. In that case, whether it's the self-immolation of that street vendor, or whether it's some people gathering in the square to that there's this spark for freedom, for democracy, for self-determination, And that what happens is that the regime, usually in a crackdown, feels threatened. There's always conspiracy. In the regimes that crack down on the people, there's always a conspiracy underneath it. There's always this sense of fear of the people. Fear. And that can be made on religious terms, it can be political, but it's always there. And if you have a regime that fears its people, or sees conspiracy everywhere, then you will have violence and fear, this sort of instituting of violence, to sort of push down the idea. I don't know why these guys don't get it, but it doesn't work. I mean, you're better off to pay off your population than you are to try and push them down. And that's a phenomenon that maybe will come up later when we start talking about what are the conditions of what does it take for people to connect with something, to connect with a cause, to connect with something in a way that is visceral. Not just an idea that they like or that tickles them, but that's visceral. That's what we see in the Arab Spring. And so what you have is people, these protests explode with an entirely new purpose. So even if the purpose was initially, we want democracy, we want self-determination, we want electoral reform, we want less corruption, it quickly turns into, we want you gone. We want you to stop killing us. Right? You killed my brother. I'm not going to back down, right? I'm not going to back down, and that's really what you see that happening in places like this. And which is ironic because then the regime that's trying to put down that sees their worst fears realized, and so everything in the protest. This is what the Syrians were trying to do, was to try to say we're not fighting back, we're not a rebel army, we're not out to take you down, so we're not going to engage. Right? Because if you do engage, then that just is, see, they're out to get me. I've got to go even harder. And then they fight back, and then you have violence, and then you even have to go more. Look, they're coming everywhere. They're coming out of the woodwork. Boom, 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 boom. It's a cycle. It's a cycle of violence that then reinforces itself and spins into this abyss currently that is Syria. And then you have civil war and strife and violence and all of these things. And they start from that tiny, tiny little spark. So the thing that I'm kind of coming with is that what were they following? What are people in the Arab Spring following? And I don't think it's the same thing all the time. Although I think the idea, the initial idea is the same: self-determination, empowerment, voice, and that can take the form of democracy. And there's lots of different kinds of democracy, so it's not like there's only one style of democracy. There are a lot, but that idea is really, really powerful in us. And that when you for people who have the idea that you can do this, that life can be better when you self-determine, then that's something that leaders fear, usually. Let's see. And so the idea of the first follower is something that is intriguing to me. Because who were those first people? That's what I'm like. Who were those first people that stepped out into the line? That the first people to go and protest, those first people to go out. Actually, what they were was again, these are the people that don't follow other people. They follow ideas. These are actually not followers in that respect. I think this is where I think of first followers as dissenters. Right? And these are very unusual people. I don't think any of us, I mean maybe, but my guess is that none of us in this room, are first followers. Like we're more likely to follow other people who go before us rather than follow an idea that is totally countercultural, that is completely dangerous, that is completely goes against and puts yourself and your family on the line and at risk. That very few of us are in a position to really do that and put ourselves in a position where we are going to lose something. And I think this is what it takes to be a first follower. First followers are rebels. They are rebels. They are countercultural people. They're not normal in that respect. Usually we're a very cooperative species. That for the most part, if we see somebody that needs help, we will help them. That's pretty true across the board. I don't think that is something that we necessarily learn through our culture. I think it is part of what makes us part of our species. It's part of the way we're wired, and it makes sense from an evolutionary standpoint that to be a helper is much better for us as people than it is to be people who are always hindering or always trying to go against the flow. That actually is not a very good way to survive in our culture. So even though we kind of, in America, we sort of have this maverick, this sort of frontier mentality that we're always going to be the first there, and you should never follow anyone, follow your dreams, follow the fact is that we don't. I mean, I think that's part of what gets people, that's what allows people to feel like they're, special and unusual and unique, but really, in fact, it's just like Christmas or Valentine's Day. It's supposed to, you buy them one present on one day of the year, and then you're supposed to just be quiet the rest of it. And I'll take you out for dinner on Valentine's Day, but the rest of the year, I can treat you like crap. Right? Or Christmas is the same thing. It actually shouldn't get me started on the history of Christmas and gift giving in America. It's a very sordid tale. But that idea of the first follower as a rebel and as a dissenter is really interesting. And then what happens is you have a tipping point. And I don't know, has anybody read the Malcolm Gladwell? He's like, I really like him. He's a really fun writer to read. Yeah, Caitlin, you read that, The Tipping Point?
Yeah, it's my favorite book.
Your favorite book?
He's my favorite author. My favorite is Outliers.
I like Malcolm Gladwell. He's very accessible, and I like the way he thinks about that. But that idea of the tipping point is really crucial. And when you look at the Arab Spring, it applies. Like there's a point at which something tips, and then once it tips, it's a cascade, and it's unstoppable once it goes. It's unstoppable. So the people that come after are not the first followers. They're not the people that tip, or that part of that first wave of people who are going uphill until click, it goes, until it goes over. But again, that's something when we think about our own, like what we're following. It's not if we're following anyone. It's who we're following. That's never a question. If you don't delude yourself into thinking that you're not following, that you can actually go forward and be. That's why I like the idea of first follower. Because a first follower, there's no such thing. They cancel each other out, right? If you're a first follower, then you're a leader. But no, I don't even like the idea of the whole leadership idea, but I won't go into that either because it's so dependent on, you have to have followers behind you to be a leader. So you're always looking over your shoulder going, are they following? Are they following me? I'm a leader. I'm up front. Right? But on a first follower, they cancel each other out because you can't be a first follower because then you're a leader. So I don't like the whole leadership idea because it's too dependent on the people behind you. And then if you find yourself alone, you retract and go back and try and find some more followers, that will go with you because you can't be out there. Those outliers, those are unusual people, very unusual people indeed. So this is where I get into this idea about when I start turning this inward and start thinking about what do we have in common with the Arab Spring. Now, in this country, we have had, one of the things that we have had is a manifestation of something that's modeled on the idea of the Arab Spring wait, this is, I'm going to go back, actually. Can I go back? No? How do you go back on prison? Left arrow? Oh, I can't see it. Okay, yeah. I think I was going to do this. Yeah, no, I'll do this. Okay. So this idea that when we think about this in our way, we think like, what is the obstacle? And for us, I'm willing to say, especially compared to the Arab Spring, we are not an oppressed people. Our obstacle when we think about what we do with our lives, what we follow, has nothing to do with oppression. Not compared to the Arab Spring. That's real oppression. That's life or death oppression. More of our work is actually what I would call the seduction. The idea of seduction is much more pertinent to us when we think about who we are and what we follow. And that idea of seduction is something that will come up here. Now this is really taken its form. This is interesting. It's juxtaposed to the idea of the Occupy movement, right? Which is inspired by the Arab Spring, which is inspired and modeled off the idea of a leaderless movement, a movement that has no leader, and a movement that actually has no one cause. This is what's different about the Arab Spring and the Occupy movement. And I'm not the first to notice this, but even Arab protesters, when they look at the Occupy movement, they say, yeah, but what do you stand for? We always knew what we stood for in the Arab Spring. And even if it changed, even if it once was for democracy and self-determination, it became, you're out of office, it was a very clear, crystal clear message, especially in Egypt. Mubarak's out. Mubarak's out. I don't care how many reforms you promise you do. Mubarak's out. He offered time and time again, well, we'll do this, we'll do that. I promise I'll leave later. No, we aren't leaving until you leave now. And that was very effective. But the Occupy movement in this country has struggled to find that one single message, and by design was designed on the Occupy, on the Arab Spring. But it makes me wonder, why has it sort of floundered in this country? And I'm not saying it's dead. It's going to come up again in an election year, and it's going to come back up when we have spring. There's going to be a rejuvenation. But it's interesting because there's some of the questions that we come to is that when we look at our own setting here in America, like how irritating is America really for us? For us in this room, not very. And this gets to the idea of seduction. The greatest danger that you and I face is actually being seduced, not irritated. It's not irritated enough for us to, which is why I think, like, why didn't the Occupy movement really take on Villanova's campus? Well, because the things that the people that occupy the world protesting are not our issues. Even though we say we're the 99, we're not the 99. We're not the 99. We're the 1. We're the 1%. And so that whole, we like to think of ourselves as the 99, but we're not the 99. We're either we're the 1% or we're the wannabe 1%. Right? And that really, like, it's not really irritating what's going on. It might be irritating to some people who are directly affected by that, we can talk about. But for us, we've struggled on this campus to identify and connect with the Occupy movement. Been little rumblings here and there, but there's nothing going on campus now with that, right? Because what do you have to lose? A lot. You have a lot to lose, and that's part of the seduction. This is where in the Arab Spring, there is a point at which you have nothing to lose. This is what Gandhi talks about, like when you lose the fear of dying, you've won. Protest is over. As soon as you lose the fear of dying, it's done. It's just a matter of time to work it out. It's not that they're going to give up, but you've already won. It may take time for them to figure out how serious you are, but it's over. We have not lost the fear of dying. People in Syria and Egypt and these other places and Bahrain and hopefully Saudi Arabia and maybe Oman, it's a point where you cross over and you lose the fear of dying. That's why everybody knows that al-Bashir Assad is going down. But it's a matter of when and how many bodies are going to go before him. But everybody knows it's over for him. But it's damage control at this point. So when we think what we have to lose by something like Occupy, we have a lot to lose. We have a lot to lose. And that gets in the way of the way we calculate what we want to stand for. Because are we connected? Not really. Not really. Not in any kind of way that's even comparable to what we see in the Arab Spring. And so while we might be sympathetic to this idea, it's an idea that is not really connected to us. And this is a crucial part when we talk about this, is like, what is your connection to something? And if you have no connection, or if it's just something that sounds like a good idea, it will never click with you. You won't click. This has to do with what Jenna was talking about how you prepare yourself in a spiritual way and in a way so that you can connect. Because I'm not saying that you can't, and I'll talk about this. So what spring are you following now? That's a question which you should always be asking. Never, what do I want to follow? That's the wrong question. The right question is, what am I following right now? What am I following? And for the most part, all of you are following a pretty well-worn path. You've got to get out of here. You've got to finish. You've got to finish school so you can get a job, so you can support yourself, so you can have a family, so you can have a relationship, so you can grow old and die happy in your bed, right? I mean, that's That's what's laid out for us. That's the path that's laid out for us. So it's not like deciding what to follow is the wrong question, because you already are following something. So am I. I'm the first one to admit it, but that's question's more dangerous than saying, what am I going to follow? What's my cause? You already have a cause. You just might not be aware of it. And becoming aware of what that cause is really key. So then the question becomes like, if we're not in a position of, if no one is killing our family, if we don't have a government that is repressive like some of these Arab states, if we're not pressed against the wall where we've lost the fear of dying, where we have nothing left to lose, so we might as well go out and die in the street, because that's better than backing away and letting this continue. We're not in that position. So then the question becomes, well, how? Then do we just give up? Do we have to wait till things get so bad? How do we connect? How do we build? And this is where you get the idea. This idea of building capacity. The capacity that we have in us that you can build capacity within it, and that it's a discipline, and it's something that you have to want to do. Because actually building capacity is something that the path that you're following really isn't very interested in you doing. Because what happens when you build capacity, you are expanding your circle of influence. You're expanding the people that you are connected to. You're expanding these ideas of what connects you in this world. And when you do that, that will take you, that is a threat to the path you're on now, because that might take you in another direction. That might take you and connect in a way that is dangerous to the path that everyone is invested in you following. Everyone. There's a lot of people counting on you to follow this path. And that makes it dangerous. Right? So we did this when we were talking in our group here. We came up with this an acronym. Is that what it is? An acronym? Yeah, people. Acrostic. Yeah, an acrostic. That you build capacity through people. Right? This is through people, and this is what is coming. This is where I have little words where you go in. This is the first thing that I think that is important to remember when you start to. If you want to do this, you don't have to do it. By the way, this is optional. You don't have to build capacity. You don't have to increase your capacity to hold in the world, right? To identify with the world. But if you want to, one of the things you have to know is that it takes patience. That this does not happen right away. That this is part of a journey. That it doesn't just happen like this. It happens over decades, not weeks. But that's a long thing, and that you have to trust the process of what you're doing in this life, and that you will, unless you meet an untimely death, you will have time to realize and see how that changes the way that you interact with the world and what you do with your life. Patience is important. We live in an impatient culture which doesn't want to wait for anything, and so it's very difficult for us to fight against that, right? To fight against that. This is a different path that I'm laying out, this following stuff, not the one that is very tempting and seductive for you to follow. Because it promises safety and security and all these things that we value so much in family, which I do too. I do too. I'm humbled by that. My kids are the most important thing to me, and I love what I do, and I like getting a paycheck every month, and I like living in a house, with running water. All of these things. So I'm coming from a state of humility, not preaching. I'm preaching to myself too. The other thing of what you're doing, and this is an example of maybe what we're doing today in this little thing is and what you're doing in this process is education. That you can't build capacity to hold the world if you don't know what the world is like. You can grow capacity to hold the world if you keep the world small. Then it's very easy to contain the world. If you keep your world small, then your job is almost done. Just take care of the people right around you. Just do what's in front of you. That's your capacity right there. Education is a very dangerous, seditious act. Because finding out what's going on in the world makes you, and it's very dangerous because it makes you accountable to that. That's why a lot of people want to stay in a sense of blissful ignorance. Of just, if I don't look at that, and I don't need to take it in, I don't have to account for it, I don't have to juxtapose myself to it, I don't have to place myself in the context of, this is one person and this is another person. Education is very important in that, and that's what we're doing here. That's what you can do every day, is educate yourself about what goes on in the world. The other thing is openness too, and I think I've kind of alluded to that, is that you can educate yourself about what's happening in the world But if you don't have a sense of openness of exposing yourself, becoming vulnerable to those things, by asking tough questions like, how am I benefiting from a government that is repressing its people? If you're not open to ask those questions, how have I benefited from racism in this country? Me as a white male, how have I benefited from colonialism? How have I benefited from having 48% of the world's money spent on military? How has that benefited me? That openness to answering those questions and really looking at that's, again, very dangerous stuff. Because you might not like the answer you come up with, and that might make you uncomfortable and think, I have benefited a lot from racism. I benefited a ton from being a man as opposed to a woman. What am I going to do? What am I going to do with that privilege? What am I going to do with that? That's not a good feeling. But if you're not open to that, then it becomes just an academic thing like, I know what's going on in this part of the world, and you're just close to it. So making oneself vulnerable, or an O-word, openness, which fits the people acrostic, is what we need to know. Another key, practice. This one, Mo, you get credit for this one. The idea, this is the one I was stuck on. The idea that practice, this is an imperfect process. I think this is a huge one, actually. I really like this one. Because when you're young, you want to find your passion now. And you want to find and latch onto it and dedicate your whole life to it, like the people we look up to. Like they had that one thing and they did it all their whole life and they did these amazing things. But for the most part, we float around. We float from one thing to one thing. And the things I was concerned about when I was an undergrad are totally different than the things that I'm doing now. I'm almost 47, and that's still evolving. I'm still practicing what it means to have capacity. I'm still in a sense of practicing, which means you can fail. This is actually part of the good one, is when you practice something, you give yourself the freedom to fail at. You give yourself allowance to be mistaken. Because that's all part of the practice. That's all part. We practice law. We practice becoming, what's the term, a more perfect union. Right? We're never perfect, but we just want to be more perfect. Never perfect, but more perfect. So practicing is that idea of giving yourself leeway to not, because that guilt that comes if you say, I can't do this, and then you walk away, then that's actually quite tragic. The other one which is key, is love. That has an idea with openness, that you can do all of these things, but if you don't do it with love, it means nothing. Love of self, love of others. The love of other people is a very complex thing, indeed. But being open to the phenomenon of how love powers the world is amazing. One of the things I say when I teach my genocide class, and this has become a mantra to me, is that every genocide is a failure because we just can't help falling in love with each other. That's why racism is doomed, because we just can't help falling in love with each other. That's a kind of romantic love, but it's also that we're so social, we're so attracted to that sort of connection of what it means to be human, that in the end can will override that. Will override the fear and the sort of desperation and the threat that we sometimes see happening in other places. And I do believe that. And I know that sounds like all mamby-pamby, and I would have never said it 25 years ago. But the older I get, the more I realize that this is way beyond. This isn't about love songs. This is about a profound connection with other human beings that I don't even pretend to understand. What happens when you lock eyes with someone, when you connect with them as a human, and they don't look anything like you, and they don't act like you, they don't even talk like you, and yet you look in their eyes and you see that humanity, and it's something very, very, very profound. This is Lacan. Get this from Paul Lacan. This is Lacanian face. What happens when we encounter a human face? I'm very particular about the eyes. I think the eyes are the part of your brain that's just sticking out. They're not covered up. Because the eyes go straight. They're actually considered a part of your brain. They're not separate. There's so much connection between your eyes and your brain that scientists just call it your brain. It's not like a sensory organ that sends signals to your brain. It is your brain. Just with these open eye sockets that I take in the world, that's our brain right there. That's how close and intimate our eyes are to ourselves. It's really gross though when you think about it, that we actually have holes in our head that our brain is like poking out. It's true though. It's really cool. I can see your brain. I can see it right there. And the last one is really the kicker of all of these. And I'm really glad people ends with an E, because this is this idea of empathy. This is different than sympathy. Empathy is the capacity to feel and look through another person's eyes. In a genuine way, to surrender the self, to surrender and not see through your own eyes, but see through the eyes of another. And that is empathy, to walk in another person. And you have to use your imagination with this. This is where you have to do this. I can never say I know what it feels like to you. I know what it feels like to grieve. I know what it feels like for you to lose a child. I know what it feels like to have 435 members of your family killed in the Rwanda genocide. This is my friend Chloe. This is my friend. She lost 435 members of her family, right? I don't know what that feels like, but I want to know what that feels like. And so you use your imagination and you drain yourself of your own self and you try to live through another person's eyes. And you need to be educated, and you need to have love, and you need to practice, and you need to have patience, you need to have all those things. But that building of capacity, of containing the world in yourself, is about empathy. And if you don't have it, and that's the scariest thing, if you don't have it, then none of this makes sense. I do this in genocide because I study perpetrators. I'm not interested in survivors. I'm interested in perpetrators. I'm interested in understanding why people kill other people, which is the worst thing we can do. Why they rape, why they take a baby and smash him against the wall and kill him. I want to know how that person does that. I want to know what that person thinks, but that means I have to empathize with that person. That's incredibly hard for me to do. And most of us would never want to be inside the head of a murderer. It's abhorrent to us. But yet, for me, it's been one of these things that is one of the great challenges, is to try to understand how this happens. Not so that you can let them off or weep with them or say, it's okay, I know that news was tough, I know you were scared. No. Everyone's accountable for their actions. But so that you can figure out how people get to that place, because then you can start to figure out how you can be a little smarter than it, to get in front of it, to diffuse it. And until we understand that stuff, we're just waiting for something else terrible to happen. But empathy is the key of this. Empathy is the key of this. So really, that's. Let me see if I have the last slide. No, I don't. That's what I have prepared for you guys. That's about 42 minutes. I'm sorry, I'll make it up another time, 3 more minutes. But better than me going over. Oh yeah, it's always good to go short. I've learned that. So thank you very much for your patience. I know you guys are going to move into another section of this.
We have time for a few questions. If
You do? Oh yeah, Q&A. I don't have to. But yeah, it's good.
Question?
Yeah.
How did you get interested in studying genocide?
I went to Rwanda. I'd always been interested in Holocaust, but I did my doctorate in 2nd century Jewish-Christian relations, studying the anti-Jewish writings of the Greek fathers, Justin Martyr in 150 CE. That's what I did my doctoral work in, right? Christian history. But I've always been interested in sort of how people use religion to justify atrocity. And so when I went to Rwanda, I had always been interested in the Holocaust. I had a very sick fascination with Adolf Hitler when I was young because I was blonde hair and blue-eyed. And I thought, wow, I'm the master race. How fascinating. I would have been so popular in Germany. It's kind of sick. I'm embarrassed now, but I was fascinated with it. And so I've always been sort of fascinated with the psychology of how this. And so as an adult, I was a psych major in college, and then I did theology, went to seminary, going to be a minister, and these have all kind of come together in a very unique way for me in the study of genocide. So it's just challenge. It's just a puzzle that no one has solved yet. No one can explain why we kill, why genocides happen. But no satisfactory answer is, there are monsters out there. That's just so unsatisfying. I just find myself fascinated by it. And I like what it's done to me. I like what it's done to me because it's made me aware actually of the goodness in the world far more than I think anything else would have. I'm far more astounded by the world, not by how many genocides there are, but how few there are. Given the state of things, how kind we actually are to one another. Like for the most part in the world, for most people in the world, we're incredibly nice to each other. And that characterizes us far more than these, even though they're atrocious, there are very few of them, actually, when you think about, when you put it in context. And so that has really changed the way I saw, it's sort of ironic, the more I study atrocity, the more I value basic human kindness, and really have seen come to see us as human beings, as that's really our defining, that's what defines us. Genocide is a distortion of things, and certain factors that bring to bear on us that can make us do things, but that in our being we are these beautiful, tender, fragile, profoundly loving creatures who are sometimes easily manipulated, because we get scared easily. We're easily frightened. That's really our one weakness. So. Yeah.
Like if that timeline would keep going, where do you think you see those countries in 10 years or so?
Oh, they'll all be democratic. Oh, it's too late. They will definitely have some kind of democracy. Whether Saudi Arabia and places like that do, I don't know. That's going to be, the one to watch is when Saudi Arabia falls. That's going to shake things up. Wow. But I think it's going to happen. I just don't know when. History moves like this. It moves like this. It's always changing. So, but I don't know when. But I'm confident that it will.
Any more questions?
Yes, is the democracies developing around religion or around sort of fundamentalists? Because I know if it was Egypt, but one of them was religious that was voted in recently.
What's the what?
There was one that was voted in that is a religious government, right? I don't know if it was Egypt or Tunisia. I'm not sure.
Oh, in a good way, are you saying, or in a bad way?
No, just do you think it would be based in religious ideas for democracies?
I think there's a lot of debate about whether Islam is an inherently democratic religion or not. I tend to think that there's a lot of room in Islam for democracy. I've heard Islamic religious scholars who do a very persuasive job actually of talking about democracy within Islam. I think it's as likely as having democracy in Christianity. Right? Which if you look at Christianity, there's not much room. There's not much room for democracy there. Catholic Church is not a democracy. And yet we have democracy there. So it's possible. Anything's possible. You can have the Holy Roman Empire, and you can have democracy come out of that and be compatible. You can certainly have it within Islam. So, yeah, I'm hopelessly hopeful. Yeah. But not naively hopeful. Skeptical, but not cynical. That sort of stuff.
Great. Well, thank you.
Good. Well, thanks very much.